The late summer rain fell in a fine mist over Baltimore, a mournful whisper on the wind blowing in from the harbor, rustling the lonely pines that stood guard over the cemetery. Some chills have nothing to do with the weather. They live deep inside you, a permanent frost that sets in when you're standing before a grave that holds no body. My name is Anna Hayes. I'm 35 years old. Before everything changed, I was simply the wife of David Hayes, the CEO of Apex Maritime Logistics. To the world, he was a titan of the shipping industry, a king in this port city. To me, he was just my husband, the man with the chronic stomach pain who, after a long day, still wanted nothing more than a bowl of crab soup and a side of crisp pickles. On the night of the 18th of June 2021, the luxury yacht Times Starlight Empress Times went up in flames in the Chesapeake Bay. David was on board, attending a partner's gala. By the time I reached the pier, the fire had bled across the water, staining the night sky a sickening orange. People held me back. I screamed until my throat was raw, asking where my husband was, but no one could answer. After 3 days of searching, all they brought me was a sealed evidence bag. Inside was a scorched piece of his suit jacket, the watch I'd given him, and a wedding band, warped and twisted by the heat. No body, not a single bone fragment, no goodbye. And yet, my husband's family insisted on a cenotaph, a hollow monument to a man they'd already buried in their minds. Marilyn Hayes, David's stepmother, wept dramatically before the headstone, collapsing into a heap of sorrow. She clutched my hand, her voice a broken whisper. "Anna, it's so cold for those lost at sea. If we can't find his body, we have to at least give his spirit a place to come home to. Don't keep searching. You're only torturing him." I stared at the photograph on the stone. David was in his navy blue suit, his gaze serious but bright. I heard Marilyn's words, the sympathetic sighs of relatives, but a single thought echoed in my soul. No body, no proof. I couldn't believe it. After the memorial, the family lawyer visited me multiple times, armed with stacks of documents. They urged me to sign the papers, to have David legally declared deceased. It would, they said, simplify matters of inheritance, stock holdings, and the leadership of the company. I pushed the papers back every time. I wouldn't sign. Marilyn was stunned. "Are you going to cling to his ghost for the rest of your life?" "If you call David a ghost, then I'm sorry," I answered softly. "To me, he's still my husband." From that day on, the pity in their eyes curdled into impatience. Apex Maritime, leaderless since David's disappearance, began to drift like a rudderless ship. He'd once told me, "Anna, this company isn't just about money. It's my father's sweat, it's half my life, and it's the livelihood of hundreds of families." I had nodded then, never imagining that one day I would be forced into his chair. I learned to be a CEO in boardrooms tense enough to snap, under the skeptical gaze of shareholders, and amidst the whispers of employees in the hallway. "What does a woman know about shipping and port logistics?" they'd murmur. It hurt, of course, but the world's opinions are like the ocean's waves. You can't command them to be still just because you're tired. At night, I'd open David's old notebooks. On one page, he had scribbled, "The southern route must be held at all costs." Tears splashed onto the ink as I read his determined scrawl. Through it all, Marilyn played the part of the caring mother-in-law. She'd have her cook send me chicken soup, her hand resting on my shoulder. "It pains me to see you struggling like this, dear. Why don't you let Kevin help you more?" After all, he's David's brother. Kevin Hayes was my husband's younger half-brother. 4 years David's junior, he was smooth-tongued, always calling me sis with a syrupy sweetness. "Anna, please, think of me as family. I'm not trying to take anything. I just want to protect Apex for David." His words were righteous, but David had once warned me, "Kevin smiles a lot, but his eyes never do. Don't hate him, but don't ever trust him completely." I'd teased him then. "You've been a CEO so long you see everyone as a contract with hidden clauses." He had laughed. "Caution is never a waste, especially with people who share your dinner table." 3 years passed. I still visited his empty grave regularly. Every time I cleaned his photograph, I'd tell him how the company was doing. As long as I was standing, Apex would not fall into the wrong hands. That morning, I walked into the 17th floor boardroom at Apex headquarters. Through the glass walls, the Port of Baltimore was a blur in the rain. At the head of the table sat David's chair, In 3 years, I had never felt it belonged to me. I placed my hand on its leather back, the beat of my own heart a steady drum in my ears. David, I whispered silently, you haven't come home, so I'm not allowed to fall. The third anniversary of my father-in-law's passing fell on a day of heavy rain. The old Hayes family mansion in the suburbs was lit up early. Outside, the weeping willow shed water onto the red brick patio. The kitchen was filled with the rich aromas of roast chicken, baked ham, clam chowder, and fresh cornbread. When he was alive, Robert Hayes loved a memorial dinner that tasted of home. He used to say that returning spirits didn't need fancy feasts, just a warm meal, and the sight of their family gathered together. I remembered his words, so every year, I personally oversaw the final touches in the kitchen. Marilyn always protested gently, "You're a CEO now, dear. Leave the cooking to the staff. It's a burden for a woman to be too capable." Her words sounded like sympathy, but each one felt like it had a tiny, sharp hook. I would just smile. He loved a home-cooked meal. I'm happy to do what I can. Marilyn sat at the head of the dining table, dressed in a dark velvet gown, her hair in a neat bun, her fingers tracing a string of pearls. To an outsider, she was the picture of a devoted wife and stepmother, dutifully honoring her husband's memory. But after 3 years of living in that house, I understood that some tears don't fall from pain. They fall precisely when they are needed to soften someone else's resolve. Kevin arrived late. He wore a crisp white shirt, a box of expensive cigars in hand. He immediately bowed his head before his father's portrait on the mantel. "Dad, sorry I'm late. Don't be upset. Things have been crazy at the office." He said it just loud enough for the whole room to hear. I was placing a glass of water on the table, and my hand faltered. Yes, things at the company were chaotic, but most of the chaos had started since Kevin's people began appearing in key departments. Marilyn dabbed the corner of her eye with a napkin. "Seeing you two so dedicated to Apex would surely give your father peace." Kevin turned to me, his voice soft. "Anna, you look so thin. You can't keep carrying everything yourself. David would be worried if he saw you." I looked at him. "I'm managing." He gave a slight smile. "I know you're capable, sis. But a maritime logistics company isn't a one-woman show, especially for a woman who's been through such a shock. I'm just worried you'll burn out." His words were cloaked in concern, but spoken in front of our relatives at a memorial dinner, they were a clear indictment. I wasn't strong enough to hold the fort. A great aunt seated nearby chimed in. "Kevin has a point. No matter how strong a woman is, she needs a man to lean on. Anna is still young. It's a heavy burden, managing the entire Hayes legacy." I set my fork down. Before I could speak, Marilyn sighed. "Anna, darling, I'm being honest with you. I'm grateful that you're protecting Apex for David, but Kevin is also a Hayes. He's David's flesh and blood. Why won't you let him share more of the load?" The phrase times flesh and blood times stuck in my throat. I was David's wife, the one legally empowered to act in his stead, the one who had weathered every storm the company had faced for 3 years. Yet, because I didn't share their bloodline, I would forever be an outsider. "Marilyn," I said gently, "I'm not stopping Kevin from helping, but executive authority, financial controls, and access to port data must follow corporate governance. We can't just transfer power because we're family." The atmosphere at the table instantly chilled. Kevin quickly waved his hand. "Oh, sis, don't misunderstand me. I'm not asking for power. I just see how hard you're working and want to help. If you don't trust me, then forget I said anything." Brilliant. With one sentence, he had reframed the situation. I, the one upholding protocol, was now the suspicious, petty sister-in-law. Marilyn placed her wine glass down. The soft clink on the table sounded as cold as ice. "Anna, I don't blame you. But you should remember, you're not the only one in this house who loves David. Kevin lost his brother. I lost my son. Your pain is great, but mine is 10 times greater." I bowed my head. The old me would have apologized instantly. But the past 3 years had taught me one thing. The person who cries the loudest isn't always the one in the most pain. "I never thought I was the only one hurting," I replied. "But I can't let my pain cause me to betray what David entrusted to me." Marilyn's eyes reddened. "What did he entrust to you?" I looked up. "He told me that in business, everything must be in black and white, especially with family. Because obligation is the biggest hole you can punch in the hull of a ship. Kevin's smile was faint, but the corner of his mouth twitched. David was always careful. Sometimes, too careful. He turned loved ones into strangers. That line sent a shiver down my spine. I stared at him, but he had already turned his attention to serving his mother a piece of fish, as if he hadn't just uttered something so profoundly menacing. The dinner ended in a strained silence. As the relatives left, Marilyn retreated to her room. I went to the kitchen to help the housekeeper clear the table. Walking past the back hallway, I heard Kevin's voice from the patio. "Yeah, just keep up the pressure. The more she tries to hold on, the more nervous the shareholders will get. No need to push too hard yet." I froze behind the wooden door. I couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, only Kevin's hushed tone. "Don't worry. A woman who has spent 3 years mourning at an empty grave, all it will take is a few more articles to make everyone question her stability." I clenched the dish towel in my hand. Outside, the rain drummed against the awning. The scent of incense from the memorial still lingered in the house, a warmth that now felt bone-chillingly cold. I turned and walked away silently. I didn't confront him. They say you can know a person's face but not their heart, but sometimes you don't need to see the whole heart. Just a crack is enough to reveal the darkness inside. That night, I stood before my father-in-law's portrait and David's photograph for a long time. Marilyn maintained her facade of gentle motherhood, and Kevin kept up his sweet sis. I was beginning to understand. In this house, they didn't need to throw me out. They just needed to slowly, methodically, make it so there was no place left for me to stand. Monday morning, I arrived at the office while the sky was still a bruised gray. The roads were slick from the night's rain. A long line of container trucks snaked its way toward the port gates. The distant blast of a ship's horn echoed like a heavy sigh. The Apex headquarters on Thames Street offered a panoramic view of the harbor from the 17th floor. David used to stand by the window, pointing down at the giant yellow cranes. "Look, Anna," he'd say. "Every one of those containers is a family's livelihood. A leader who only sees the money will sink, sooner or later." His voice still echoed in my ears as I walked into the boardroom. A red file folder was placed squarely in front of the CEO's chair. Tom, the head of sales, had a grim look on his face. "Anna, we just received a notice from East Asia Logistics. They're canceling the Baltimore to Singapore route contract." I opened the file. It was a $21.8 million deal. We were about to sign the final addendum. The official reason was polite, a strategic realignment of their shipping priorities. But at the bottom of the email, I saw the real story. They were switching to harborfront shipping. Dominic Greco's company. I put the paper down. "What's the real reason?" Tom glanced around the room before lowering his voice. "They said they're concerned about the internal instability at Apex. Someone told them our leadership is about to change." The boardroom was silent. I looked at each face. Some studied their notepads, others avoided my eyes. The rumor of a leadership change had only been hinted at by Kevin during the memorial dinner. Now, a major client knew. Bad news travels faster than an Uber in rush hour. Before I could process it, Carol, our CFO, rushed in, her expression even more strained. "Anna, North American Bank, just sent a notice. They're freezing the disbursement of our $108 million line of credit. They're demanding a formal explanation of our executive risk." I frowned. "What executive risk?" Carol handed me her phone. Attached to the email was an anonymous letter. It claimed I frequently visited my husband's empty grave and talked to myself, showing signs of prolonged trauma and delusion, making me unfit to manage large-scale financial decisions. I laughed, a bitter taste filling my mouth. So now mourning my husband is evidence of insanity? No one dared to answer. Mark, our head of operations, sighed. "That's not all. Our fuel supplier is changing their terms. They're demanding an upfront payment of $6.4 million for this month's fuel, or they'll cut off the 3 ships currently at berth." I looked at the progress chart. Those 3 ships were scheduled for the transatlantic route. Any delay would trigger a chain reaction of contractual penalties. A single knot was being tightened, and the entire ship was suffocating. "They've always given us a 4-5-day credit," I said. "Why the sudden change?" Mark shook his head. "They said they've heard things about Apex and don't want to take any chances." Heard things, again. I stood up and walked to the window. Below, the semi-trucks crawled like tired ants. I could feel an invisible hand squeezing the life out of Apex. It wasn't a loud, direct assault. It was subtle, making clients afraid, banks retreat, suppliers back away, and shareholders panic. Just then, the boardroom door opened. Kevin walked in, wearing a light blue shirt and carrying a folder, a look of deep concern etched on his face. The perfect image of a devoted younger brother. "Anna, I heard about the bank. I came right up. Are you okay?" I turned back to him. "You hear things fast." He paused for a beat, then smiled. "I have a few connections in the financial world. They called to give me a heads up so we could prepare." A minor shareholder at the end of the table spoke up. "It's good that Kevin has connections. Maybe he should be the one to talk to the bank." To be honest, he cleared his throat. Right now, what they need to see is a man from the Hayes family stepping up. I looked at him. "Are you suggesting that my 3 years in this chair haven't been enough to make me part of the Hayes family?" The man stammered. "No, that's not what I meant. It's just that you're a woman, and He trailed off, but everyone in the room finished the sentence in their heads. "Grieving, rumored to be unstable, and still an outsider in a family that only trusts its bloodline." Kevin quickly interjected. "Anna, Mr. Peterson didn't mean it that way. Everyone is just worried about you. How about this? Let me temporarily handle external relations with the banks and major clients. You're still the CEO. I'll just be supporting you from behind the scenes." I almost laughed, supporting from behind the scenes times while his hand was already on the back of my chair. "Thank you, Kevin," I replied. But the delegation of authority isn't decided by emotions in a boardroom. Any proposal requires a formal document with defined responsibilities and risk assessments. Apex is not a flea market where anyone can just jump in and start collecting money. A few people looked down. Kevin's smile remained, but his eyes darkened. "You're always so by the book, sis. I'm just afraid that while we're following the rules, we'll miss the chance to save the company." I looked straight at him. A company dies faster from breaking the rules than from being slow. The meeting dragged on for over 3 hours. We formed an emergency task force, called back every client, sent a formal explanation to the bank, and tried to renegotiate the fuel terms. I spoke until my throat was raw, but with every call, I felt the rumors spreading like an oil slick on water. By late afternoon, the communications department sent me a few new online articles. The headlines were polite but cruel. "Is Apex Maritime's CEO steady enough after family tragedy? Shipping giant faces risk of emotional leadership." One article even featured a long-lens photo of me standing in front of David's cenotaph. I stared at that picture for a long time. I was just there to talk to my husband. In someone else's hands, my grief had been twisted into evidence against me. Late that evening, our lawyer, Adam Cole, arrived. He had been David's law school classmate and later became Apex's legal counsel. He walked into my office and dropped a stack of printed articles on my desk. "Anna, someone is building a psychological profile to have you removed from your position." I poured him a glass of water, my hand trembling so much the glass shook. I figured. Adam looked at me. "Do you suspect anyone?" I was silent for a moment. Outside the window, the sky darkened, and the port lights blinked on, casting a pale yellow glow. "I have my suspicions, but suspicions without proof just make me a hysterical woman in their eyes." Adam sighed. "Then we need to find proof." I looked at the photo of David on my desk. He was still smiling, as calm as ever, as if he might walk through the door at any moment. "I'm not afraid of losing a business battle, Adam," I said slowly. "I'm just afraid the person stabbing me in the back is someone who shares my dinner table." Adam didn't reply. Some pains are so deep they defy comfort. That night, long after the offices had gone dark, I remained in the CEO's suite. Outside, the sound of a ship's horn faded into the distance. On my computer screen was a list of contracts on the verge of collapse. On my phone was a text from Marilyn. "If you're tired, let Kevin share the burden. Don't push so hard that you break everything David built." I read the message over and over, then placed the phone face down on the desk. They weren't trying to rip the company from my hands with one violent pull. They were just trying to exhaust me, to make the world doubt me, to have my own family advise me, until I finally let go myself. But they forgot one thing. A woman who has held her husband in her heart for 3 long years isn't so easily broken by a corporate storm. 3 days after that grueling meeting, Kevin brought Dominic Greco to Apex. The weather over Baltimore had finally cleared. Sunlight streamed through the boardroom windows, glinting off the long, polished table. I sat in the CEO's chair, staring at reports filled with red ink. Ships were idle, the bank line was frozen, and 2 major clients had suspended negotiations. The company felt like it was being strangled, still breathing, but every breath was agony. Kevin entered first, a perfectly calibrated smile on his face, his expression one of urgent concern. "Anna, I invited Mr. Greco over to talk. He's expressed a generous interest in helping Apex through this difficult time." Behind him was a man in his 40s. Dominic Greco was tall and trim, dressed in a light gray suit, his hair perfectly combed. He didn't rush to shake my hand, merely offering a slight nod. "Hello, Anna. I've heard a great deal about you. It's a pleasure to finally speak with you properly." I stood, maintaining a professional distance. "Mr. Greco, here at the office, I'd prefer you call me Miss Hayes." He smiled faintly, as if my coolness was an amusing quirk. "Of course, my apologies." Harborfront Shipping, Dominic Greco's company, had been Apex's biggest rival for years. David once told me that Greco wasn't a loud man, but when he set his sights on something, he held on with the tenacity of a bulldog. Those words echoed in my mind now. Kevin pulled out a chair for Greco and poured him tea. "Anna, Mr. Greco is aware of our situation with the bank. His company is willing to provide a $78 million guarantee and allow Apex to use a secondary berth at Harborfront's terminal for the next 3 months. That would get our 3 idle ships moving again." I looked at the proposal on the table. The terms were beautiful, almost unreasonably so. A preferential interest rate, flexible repayment terms, deeply discounted docking fees. In life, the only free cheese is in a mousetrap. "And what does Harborfront want in return?" I asked. Greco steepled his fingers on the table, his voice deliberate. "For now, a strategic partnership. Apex has the fleet and the international client base. Harborfront has the port infrastructure, the warehouse space, and the cash flow. If we join forces, we both win." I took a sip of my now cold tea. A years-long rival suddenly wants to play rescuer. It's quite touching. Kevin laughed quickly. "Sis, that's not fair to Mr. Greco. In business, there are no permanent enemies. Besides, he had great respect for David." Greco glanced at the photograph of David on the credenza. David was a formidable man. I truly respected him. It would be a shame to see everything he built crumble. I heard the words "a shame," and a chill went through me. In his mouth, my husband's legacy sounded like a precious antique about to be sold at a distress sale. The meeting ended without any signatures. I told them I needed the board's review. Kevin was visibly annoyed but kept up his compliant facade. "Of course, sis. Take your time. I know how careful you are." That same evening, Marilyn called me home for dinner. As soon as I walked into the living room, I saw Dominic Greco sitting there, a pot of tea and a plate of ginger snaps on the coffee table before him. Marilyn, wearing a silk turquoise dress, smiled as if there were no storm clouds anywhere in her world. "Anna, you're home. I invited Mr. Greco to join us. When someone extends a helping hand to our family, we must show our gratitude." I glanced at Kevin. He avoided my gaze, busying himself with peeling an orange for his mother. The dinner consisted of steamed sea bass, garlic shrimp, clam chowder, and crab cakes, with a side of sautéed asparagus, all of David's favorites. I didn't know if Marilyn was being thoughtless or deliberate, but sitting at that table, looking at the empty chair beside me, my heart ached with a dull, persistent pain. Marilyn placed a piece of fish on my plate. "Eat, dear. You're too thin." A woman trying to run a company all by herself. It's a hard life, no matter how capable she is. Greco chimed in smoothly. Strong women are often strong because they have no one to lean on. But with the right person by her side, Anna wouldn't have to make herself suffer so. I put down my fork. "Mr. Greco, discussing my personal life during a family dinner seems a bit premature." He wasn't offended, only smiling. "My apologies. I spoke out of turn, seeing you so burdened." Marilyn sighed. "Anna, I know you're still grieving for David, but it's been 3 years. If a living person clings to a ghost for too long, they'll get burned. Honestly, if a good man who can also help Apex comes along, you should consider it. I looked at her. Consider what, Marilyn? Kevin set his glass down, his voice as soft as the wind. Anna, if you and Mr. Greco were to become a family, Harborfront's assistance to Apex would be much more legitimate. The banks would be reassured, and the shareholders would stop calling for a new CEO. I felt my throat tighten. The entire table fell silent. The clinking of a spoon from the kitchen sounded unnaturally loud. Are you suggesting, I asked slowly, that I should marry Mr. Greco? Marilyn's eyes immediately welled up. No one is forcing you, dear. I just feel for you, and for David's legacy. You're still young. Are you really going to chain yourself to an empty grave for the rest of your life? I let out a very quiet laugh. You say you aren't forcing me, but every word you speak is meant to push me toward my husband's memorial. Greco looked at me, his voice deepening. Anna, I'm not asking you to forget David. I'm just offering you a way forward. A lone woman fighting against the entire business world. It's exhausting. I looked directly into his eyes. They were polite, composed, but deep within them was something as cold as water at the bottom of a well. Thank you, Mr. Greco, I replied, but I don't need anyone to show me the way. The meal ended awkwardly. I went upstairs to the family study to light a fresh stick of incense for David. As the smoke curled before his photograph, I heard Marilyn's hushed voice from downstairs. She's still too stubborn, Kevin replied. A strong will needs to be met with a tender heart, Mother. I stood motionless before the altar. The incense burned, its red tip glowing before the ash fell. They say fire tests gold, and adversity tests strength. But I was beginning to understand that in the Hayes house, adversity didn't just happen. Someone was lighting the fire, and then expecting me to be grateful to the one holding the water bucket. An emergency shareholders meeting was called for Saturday morning in the Grand Conference Hall at Apex. Outside, the harsh sun reflected off the windows, and the distant harbor shimmered as if coated in salt. I walked in to find nearly all the major shareholders already present. The faces that had once shaken David's hand and laughed with him now looked at me with a mixture of pity and impatience. Kevin sat at the long table, a thick binder in front of him. He stood when he saw me, his voice still soft. Anna, please. Have a seat. Everyone just wants to hear the plan to save Apex. I pulled out my chair. Then let's begin. Mr. Peterson, an old shareholder and a former friend of my father-in-law, spoke first, his tone retaining a shred of respect. Anna, my dear, we all know you've done your best these past few years. But the situation has changed. Our ships are idle, the bank has frozen our credit, and contracts are being canceled one after another. Without a new injection of capital, Apex won't survive. Another man chimed in, we need stability. It's understandable that Miss Hayes is still affected by David's disappearance, but a company cannot be run on sentiment. I turned to him. Be more specific. Which of my decisions has been affected by my sentiments? He coughed. It's not just one decision. It's the image of leadership. The press has written about it. When our partners read that, how can they trust us? I felt a hot anger rise in my chest. They were using my pain as evidence against me, my visits to my husband's memorial as a reason to doubt my sanity. It's true what they say. You don't need a knife to make someone bleed. Kevin stood up at the perfect moment. Uncles, everyone, allow me to be direct. Right now, there is only one viable option to save Apex. Harborfront Shipping, led by Mr. Dominic Greco, is prepared to guarantee our $78 million line of credit, reopen their secondary berth for our ships, provide fuel assistance, and bring the banks back to the negotiating table. Mr. Peterson asked immediately, what are the conditions? Kevin glanced at me, then looked down as if he were pained to say it. Mr. Greco wants a strong commitment. If Anna and Mr. Greco were to be married, the two companies would become family. The partnership would be official. Apex would be saved, the shareholders would be reassured, and our employees would keep their jobs. A murmur went through the room. I sat in silence, my nails digging into my palms. A middle-aged female shareholder spoke up. It's not such a bad thing. Anna is young, and David has been gone for 3 years. The living must go on. I turned to her. My husband's body was never found. She sighed. but you can't let the entire company die for one person who may or may not return. Her words felt like a slap. I wanted to ask her, if the man in that empty grave were your husband, would you speak so lightly? But I swallowed the words. In this room, if I raised my voice, they would immediately label it losing control. Kevin continued, I know this is incredibly difficult for my sister-in-law, but if she doesn't accept, the board will be forced to consider appointing a temporary replacement for the CEO role. I don't want to sit in David's chair, but if the situation demands it, he left the sentence hanging. How convenient. The one who wants to usurp the throne always claims he was forced into it. You've prepared for every scenario, haven't you? I asked. From a financial rescue to a CEO replacement, you have an answer for everything. Kevin's face flushed. You're being unfair, sis. I'm only thinking of Apex. Mr. Peterson tapped his fingers on the table. Anna, I'm asking you directly. Do you have another plan? I looked around the room. No one was on my side. Some genuinely pitied me. Some were terrified of losing their investment, and some had already been swayed by Kevin. The entire room felt like a net, and I was the fish being cornered. That afternoon, I returned to the Hayes mansion. Marilyn was standing before David's photograph, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. The moment she saw me, she said, You see, even the shareholders, people who aren't family, are worried about Apex. You're David's wife. How can you bear to let his company collapse? I was too exhausted to even take off my shoes. You really want me to marry Mr. Greco? She turned, her eyes red. I want you to save your husband's life's work. Remarrying isn't a betrayal. You'd be doing it times for times, David. I laughed, but tears welled in my eyes. Marrying another man for my husband's sake. You make it sound so noble. Marilyn's voice hardened. Don't be insolent. A woman's devotion is a virtue, but when that devotion destroys a legacy, it becomes stubbornness. You're in a position of power now. You have to think of the hundreds of people who depend on this company. I looked at David's photograph. He remained silent, his calm gaze seeming to take everything in. That evening, Dominic Greco sent me a prenuptial agreement. I read each line, my hands growing colder. It included a clause stating that after the marriage, for the sake of strategic consolidation and stability, I would grant him power of attorney over the majority of my voting shares for a period of 5 years. I held the document and smiled grimly. The wedding dress wasn't even chosen, but the cage was already being measured. That night, I sat in David's old home office. His fountain pen was still in the drawer. His notebook fell open to the page where he had written, As long as Apex has our people, we have a way to survive. I touched the words. Outside, the rain tapped against the glass. I remembered the nights he'd clutched his stomach in pain, but still had the driver take him down to the port to check on the refrigerated cargo. I remembered the calluses on his hands, the way he'd teased me. Stop worrying so much, Anna. I'm stronger than I look. So strong? Yet he'd been gone for 3 years without a word. I cried for a long time, then wiped my face and called Kevin. Kevin, I agree to meet with Mr. Greco to discuss the engagement. There was a moment of silence on the other end. Then his voice brightened. Anna, you've made the right decision. David would have wanted this. I closed my eyes. But I have a condition. The engagement ceremony must be postponed for 1 week. I need to arrange things at the company and I need to go to the cemetery to tell David. Kevin agreed instantly. Of course, we'll arrange it. A week is just enough time to invite the shareholders, the banks, and the press. We'll do it properly, sis. I hung up. The room was filled with the sound of rain and the smell of old paper. I knew that from this moment, they thought they had won. But I didn't agree because I wanted to marry Dominic Greco. I agreed because I needed 7 more days. 7 days to breathe. 7 days to re-examine every crack. 7 days to save Apex before they used a wedding ring to lock me in their carefully laid trap. The next morning, I drove myself to the coastal cemetery. I didn't tell Marilyn or Kevin, nor did I take the company driver. Some apologies can only be spoken alone. With an audience, even tears become a performance for others to scrutinize. The rain in Baltimore that day was a persistent drizzle, not heavy, just a fine mist that clung to the windshield, as relentless as a sorrow that refuses to fall. The road to the cemetery was deserted, flanked by rows of pine trees bending in the wind. In the distance, a A ship's horn sounded from the port, a sound both familiar and piercing. I parked and took a bouquet of white lilies from the trunk, along with a box of chocolate-covered pretzels, a small flask of whiskey, and a gray microfiber cloth. The pretzels were David's favorite snack. Whenever he came back from a trip, he'd make a cup of hot tea, break off a piece, and make a face. Too sweet, but so good. A man needs a little sweetness in his life. Otherwise, it's just as dry as jerky. I used to scold him. "You have a sensitive stomach. You shouldn't eat so much sugar." He'd laugh. "I have my wife to remind me. What am I afraid of?" Thinking of that, my hand tightened around the box. The man who said he had me to remind him. For 3 years, all I've had to remind is a photograph. David's cenotaph was in a corner of the cemetery overlooking the bay. The black granite was slick with rain. His photo, behind its glass plate, was veiled by a thin film of water, his solemn face looking at me from a place far away. I knelt and placed the flowers neatly before the stone. "David, I'm here." The wind blew the hem of my black coat against my legs. I took out the cloth and began to wipe the granite, wiping away each raindrop from the glass. With every swipe, his face became clearer. His eyes were the same as the day he stood in the Apex boardroom, calm but resolute. The more I wiped, the more my heart broke. "I'm sorry," I whispered, afraid that if I spoke any louder, I would lose control. Yesterday, I agreed to meet with Mr. Greco to plan an engagement ceremony. In 1 week, they're going to announce it to the shareholders, the banks, the press. I know you'd be angry to hear this. I'm disgusted with myself. I opened the box of pretzels and set it beside the flask. The sweet smell of chocolate mingled with the scent of old incense and damp earth. But David, Apex is suffocating. The ships are docked, the bank has frozen our credit, clients are canceling, and the shareholders want to replace me. They say I'm clinging to a dead husband's ghost, that I'm not stable, that I'm just a woman trying to hold onto a man's chair. Tears fell onto my hands. I can stand them insulting me, looking down on me, but I can't stand to see Apex fall. It's your company, your father's legacy, the livelihood of so many people. You once told me, a leader who only cares about their own pride isn't a true leader. I lit 3 sticks of incense, holding them in my clasped hands before his picture. "I'm not getting married because I've forgotten you. I'm just trying to bail out a sinking ship." But why does it feel like I'm bailing with my own blood? The smoke from the incense curled and thinned in the wind. For a moment, I wished the photograph could speak. Even if he yelled at me, I would take it. Even if he called me a fool, I would be grateful. Just to hear his voice again, I would trade every share I owned. I bowed my head low. "If you're alive somewhere, please come home. I don't need you to be a CEO, I don't need you to be rich, I don't need you to stand before hundreds of people like you used to. Even if you have nothing, I'll be with you. But if you're really never coming back, then please forgive me." As the last word escaped my lips, a sharp pain seized my chest. I stayed kneeling like that for a long time, the rain soaking through my coat, my knees growing numb on the cold stone. All around me was the sound of the wind, the rustling of the pines, and the lonely cries of seagulls in the distance. Then I heard the faint sound of children arguing from behind a cluster of trees. "You go ask her." "No way you go, she's crying." "Just be quiet about it, those pretzels look really good." I wiped my tears and turned. A few small heads were peeking out from behind a large pine tree not far away. They were dressed in worn clothes, their flip-flops caked with mud. Each one was painfully thin. As I looked, they all ducked back in surprise, except for one boy who was a bit slower. He looked to be about 11 or 12, his skin tanned from the sun, his hair in a messy, self-done buzz cut. He was wearing a jacket that was far too big for him, clearly a hand-me-down. In his hands, he clutched a crumpled plastic bag. He was looking at me, but his eyes kept darting to the box of pretzels on the grave, a mixture of hunger and fear on his face. "What are you doing here?" I asked. He jumped, shaking his head frantically. "Nothing, ma'am. I wasn't going to take 'em. I swear. We wait till everyone's gone before we ask. My grandma says you still have to ask, even if it's for the dead. Taking without asking brings bad luck." Hearing that, my heart softened. "What's your name?" "Leo, ma'am. I'm from the fishing camp over by the inlet." I glanced behind him. The other children were still hiding, their eyes bright with hunger. I took a few wrapped granola bars from my bag and handed them to Leo. Here, share these with your friends. But remember, next time you want something, always ask the family first. Leo took them with both hands, bowing his head respectfully. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. He started to turn away, but his gaze fell on the photograph on the headstone. He stopped, his expression changing. At first, it was just a glance, but then he stepped closer, squinting to get a better look. The wind ruffled his messy hair. His young face, which had been focused on food just moments before, suddenly became serious. My heart skipped a beat. What are you looking at? Leo pointed to David's picture, his voice hesitant. Ma'am, is that man your husband? I swallowed hard. Yes, he was. The boy scratched his head, looking from me to the photograph and back again. His lips moved as if he was afraid he'd get in trouble for what he was about to say. But he looks just like Mr. Seven at my grandma's house. I froze. The drizzle continued to fall. The incense stick burned with a red glow, its smoke curling into the wind. I could hear my own heart pounding in my chest. My voice was a hoarse whisper. What did you just say? Leo clutched the bag of granola bars to his chest. I said, the man in the picture looks just like Mr. Seven. He's staying with my grandma. I felt as if the sea wind had just slammed directly into my chest. A poor kid looking for food could be mistaken. Children often see resemblances where there are none, but for some reason, his simple words sent an icy chill through my veins. I tried to keep my voice calm. Mr. Seven, tell me more about him. Leo glanced back at his friends hiding behind the tree. He was probably afraid he'd said too much, or that I'd be angry at him for comparing a dead man's photo to a living person. He hugged the snacks tighter. He lives with my grandma. He's not from our camp. Grandma found him on the mudflats a long time ago. My heart hammered against my ribs. How long ago? Leo scrunched his face, counting on his grimy fingers. A real long time, ma'am. I was in 3rd grade then. I'm in 6th grade now. So, maybe 3 years? 3 years. The words echoed in my mind, pulling me back to the night of the yacht fire. 3 years since David vanished. 3 years since they built him a tomb without a body. 3 years I had lived like a sentinel guarding a door that might never open. What's his real name? I asked. Leo shook his head. Don't know. Grandma just called him that. When she found him, he couldn't remember anything. Not his name, not where he was from. He'd just hold his head and shake. I swallowed hard. What happened to him? He was hurt real bad, ma'am. Grandma said there was a storm that night. In the morning, she found him lying in the marsh behind the mangroves. He was covered in mud. His clothes were ripped, his head was bleeding, and he had a bad burn on his back. Grandma and some of the other fishermen brought him to the free clinic, but he had no ID, no phone, nothing. I gripped the edge of my coat. The cemetery was still empty, the rain falling on my shoulders. I no longer felt the cold. Why didn't he try to find his family? Leo looked down, kicking at the wet ground with the toe of his flip-flop. He's scared of strangers, real scared. One time, these 2 men came, dressed like they were from a charity. They said they wanted to take Mr. Seven to get free medical care, but as soon as he heard one of their voices, he crawled under the bed and wouldn't stop shaking. Grandma got a bad feeling about them, so she told them he wasn't there. A knot of ice formed in my stomach. If it was David, then someone had come looking for him not to save him, but to take him away. I knelt to be at eye level with Leo. Look at this picture very carefully. Does Mr. Seven really look like the man in this photo? Leo stepped closer to the headstone. He stared at David's picture for a long time. The boyish hunger for snacks was gone, replaced by a genuine confusion. He does, ma'am, a lot. But Mr. Seven is thinner, and his skin is darker. He has a beard, and his hair is longer. The man in the picture is clean, looks like a rich guy. Mr. Seven, he looks like a fisherman who's been beat up by the sea. The description was a knife to my heart. My husband, who once wore tailored suits and commanded boardrooms with a single look, if he was alive and had become what this boy described, I couldn't bear to think about it. My voice trembled. Does he have any distinguishing marks? A scar? An old injury? Something he always keeps with him? Leo looked up instantly. Yes, ma'am. He has a long scar on his left shoulder blade. Grandma said it looked like a burn or like he got cut by a piece of metal. And he has a broken watch. It's all burned on one side, and the strap is almost broken. but he gets real mad if anyone touches it. One time I hid it from him, just playing. When he couldn't find it, he just sat on the porch all afternoon with his eyes all red. Grandma yelled at me real bad. Said being poor doesn't give us the right to mess with the one thing a man holds on to. My hands went numb. A scar on his left shoulder blade. When David was 32, a worker got trapped in a refrigerated hold at the port. David rushed in to pull him out and was struck by a piece of hot, flying metal. I had applied ointment to that scar for weeks. And the burned watch, it was the birthday gift I had given him. After the fire, they said they had found a watch belonging to David in the wreckage. But the item in the evidence bag was just the shattered face, the strap completely gone. I was in too much pain at the time to question why it wasn't whole. I pressed my fingers into the cold stone beside the grave. Does he ever call out anyone's name? Leo tilted his head, thinking as raindrops collected in his messy hair. Sometimes. When he's having a bad dream, he says one name. It's kinda quiet, so I don't always hear it right. I think it's Anna. I closed my eyes, and the tears I had been holding back finally broke free. Before me was my husband's empty grave. Beside me was a boy from a fishing camp, clutching snacks from a stranger. And between these two disconnected things, a door that had been sealed shut for 3 years suddenly creaked open. "Where is your village?" I asked urgently. "It's over past the inlet, on the other side of the causeway. It's over an hour's drive." "But, ma'am," Leo hesitated. "What is it?" "Please don't scare Mr. Seven. He's scared of strangers, especially people wearing black clothes. Anytime someone in black comes asking questions, he hides." I looked down at the black suit I had worn to the memorial. It suddenly felt as heavy as a funeral shroud. If that man was David, what horrors had he endured these past 3 years that even a color could trigger such fear? I took off my black scarf and stuffed it into my handbag. Then, I pulled some money from my wallet and handed it to Leo. "Take this and buy some food for your friends. But please, don't tell anyone, not even your friends, that you're taking me to see Mr. Seven." Leo didn't take the money immediately. He looked at the bills, then at me. "Grandma says we shouldn't take too much money from strangers. It makes you indebted." My heart ached. A poor child who understood the fear of being indebted. While out there, men in expensive suits sat in climate-controlled offices, owing a debt to their own conscience without ever losing a wink of sleep. I folded the bills and pressed them into his hand. "This isn't a debt. This is a thank you. Consider it a gift for your grandmother, for some rice and eggs. A thank you for telling me the truth." Leo took the money with both hands. "Yes, ma'am," he whispered. I turned back to David's cenotaph. The incense had burned more than halfway down, the smoke drifting across his photograph. The box of pretzels and the flask of whiskey sat untouched. Just moments ago, I was kneeling here, apologizing for a marriage I was being forced into. Now, I wanted to shatter the granite before me, not out of anger at him, but because if he was alive, this grave had been burying me in a lie for 3 long years. I knelt and straightened the bouquet of lilies. "David, if that man is really you, I will bring you home. Even if you don't remember me, even if you're afraid of me, even if the entire Hayes family stands in my way, I will not let them erase you a second time." I stood up and wiped my tears. "Leo, take me there." The boy nodded, then turned and waved to his friends. "You guys head back. I'm taking this lady to the camp to see Mr. Seven. And don't you go blabbing about this, you hear?" The other kids, clutching their granola bars, scampered off, looking back at me as if I were some strange apparition in the cemetery. I followed Leo out of the gates. Behind me, David's empty grave sat in the misty rain. Ahead of me was a muddy path leading toward a remote, unfamiliar inlet. I didn't know who I was about to meet, a man who resembled my husband, or my husband himself, battered by life until he had forgotten his own name. But my intuition was screaming louder than it ever had before. For the past 3 years, I wasn't crazy. I was just the only one who refused to believe the lie the Hayes family wanted me to accept. Leo led me down a narrow path behind the cemetery. The dirt track was a quagmire of mud, rutted with the tire tracks of fishermen's motorcycles. I, who was used to navigating boardrooms in high heels, now had to roll up my pants, steadying myself on a rickety fence as I walked. Leo, nimble and quick, led the way, occasionally looking back to call out, "Stay on the left, Miss Anna." The mud's real deep on the right. I lost a flip-flop in there once. Grandma laughed at me for 3 days. Despite the tension coiling in my stomach, I managed a small smile. Life is strange. In the middle of a personal hurricane, a child's simple words could feel like a deep breath. The path eventually opened up to a long causeway, flanked on one side by a mangrove swamp and on the other by the brackish, silt-colored water of the inlet. The sea breeze was salty and carried the scent of decaying seaweed, dried fish, and the raw, earthy smell of the mudflats. In the distance, a cluster of low-slung houses with tin roofs huddled together. Thin wisps of smoke rose from their chimneys. A few old fishing boats were overturned on the shore, their bellies facing the sky. Tattered fishing nets, patched in a dozen places, hung on clotheslines. As we walked, Leo talked. "Our village is real poor, ma'am. When the sea is calm, we have fish. When the storms come, we stay home and mend nets. Grandma always says it's better to eat thin soup than to eat what's not yours. That's why we only ask for stuff at the cemetery. We never just take it." I looked at the boy's thin back, and my heart sank. There were children so poor they waited for offerings at a grave to eat, yet they still held onto a code of honor. Meanwhile, out there, men in suits sat on leather chairs, speaking of ethics and principles, while their own souls were as full of holes as a rotten fishing net. Imagine, I thought, you are me in that moment. On the verge of being forced to marry another man to save your husband's company, you suddenly hear he might be alive, living in a forgotten fishing village. Would you go? Would you follow a poor boy based on a few fragile clues? The truth of what happened next, behind the yacht fire, was more painful than I could have ever imagined. After nearly an hour, we reached a house at the very end of the village. It was a small, low structure with a tin roof patched with old asbestos sheets. Strings of drying fish hung from the eaves. An elderly woman with silver hair and a slightly stooped back was sitting on the porch, cleaning a bowl of collard greens next to a bucket of small shrimp. Seeing Leo, she looked up. "You're back. What took you so long?" Leo ran to her, his voice a torrent of words. "Grandma, I brought a lady with me. She said the man in the picture at the cemetery is her husband, and he looks just like our Mr. Seven." The old woman set down her greens. Her eyes were clouded with age but as sharp as a blade. She looked me up and down, from head to toe, not immediately inviting me in. "Who are you looking for?" I bowed my head respectfully. "Ma'am, hello. My name is Anna Hayes. I'm looking for my husband, David Hayes. He went missing 3 years ago after a fire on the yacht Times Starlight Empress. Your grandson told me there's a man here who resembles him." The woman was silent. The wind made the drying fish clatter against each other. After a moment, she asked, "Are you sure you want to find him? Sometimes, finding someone is harder to bear than losing them." Her words were a sharp pang in my chest. "I can bear it," I replied. "As long as it's really him, no matter what has become of him, I can bear it." She studied me for another moment, then sighed. "My name is Rose. I'm Leo's grandmother. 3 years ago, after a bad storm, me and some others from the village were pulling in our nets when we found a man washed up in the mangroves. He was bruised all over, his head was bleeding, there was a big burn on his back, and his clothes were in tatters. He had no papers on him." I clutched my purse strap. "Did you take him to a hospital?" "Of course. We took him to the county clinic. They registered him as a John Doe, suffering from a head trauma, back burns, and psychological shock. But a few days later, 2 men showed up. They said they were from a charity and wanted to transfer him for free treatment." Rose sneered. "I may be poor, but I'm not blind. Men doing charity work don't have eyes that dart around like loan sharks. Besides, the moment Seven heard one of their voices, he crawled under the bed, shaking like a fish out of water. I knew something was wrong, so I told them he had already passed away and we'd buried him." A chill ran down my spine. "And they believed you?" "Not entirely. This is a small village. It's easy for strangers to come in, but not so easy for them to leave unnoticed. The people here may not be rich, but we look out for our own, especially someone who's been hurt." They lingered for a few days, then disappeared. Leo chimed in. "Mr. Seven is real gentle, ma'am. He's great at mending nets and he carves little boats for me. But he's terrified of fire. If anyone starts a big fire in the stove, he just holds his head." My voice was barely my own. "Where is he now?" Rose looked toward the back of the house. mending a net on the back porch. But don't you go rushing in. He's afraid of strangers, especially anyone who cries and calls out his name. If you startle him, he'll run out to the flats, and I won't be able to get him back." I nodded repeatedly. "I understand. I'll just look. I won't scare him." She led me through a small kitchen where a pot of fish chowder was simmering, the warm scent of onions and thyme filling the air. Through the back door, I saw him. A man was sitting under a covered patio, his head bent as he worked on a large, torn green net. His shoulders were thinner than I remembered. His hair was long, touching the nape of his neck, and his skin was darkened by the sun. His hands were rough and calloused from the netting twine. But one glance, and my heart stopped. On his left shoulder blade, visible where his old shirt had shifted, was the long scar I had once treated every night. And on his wrist, tied with a faded piece of cloth, was the burned watch. I clamped my hand over my mouth to stifle a sob. Just then, the man looked up. His eyes met mine. There was no recognition, no joyful cry of Anna. There was only fear. A deep, primal fear of a stranger. He scrambled backward, dropping the netting needle to the ground. "Grandma, who is that?" I was frozen to the spot. For 3 years I had prayed to God to let my husband be alive. But no one had ever prepared me for what to do if he was alive, and looked at me as if I were a stranger who had stumbled into his life by mistake. I had always imagined that if I ever saw David again, I would run to him, throw my arms around him, and cry until I had no tears left. I imagined he would call my name, hold my hand, and say something simple, like, "Anna, I'm home." But real life rarely follows a script. The man before me was my husband. The scar, the watch, the slight crook in his pinky finger from when he'd slammed it in a warehouse door years ago, it couldn't be anyone else. Yet his eyes were empty. He backed away toward Rose, his shoulders tensed, the needle lying forgotten in the dirt. He just stared at me, as if I were someone who was about to drag him back into the sea. "Grandma, who is she?" Hearing those words was a pain so sharp it numbed my face. Leo, standing beside me, whispered, "Mr. Seven, this lady says you look like her husband." David immediately shook his head, his breathing growing shallow. "No, I'm not him. I don't know her." I took half a step forward on pure instinct. David. The moment he heard the name, he clapped his hands over his ears, his entire body trembling, his eyes turning wild. Don't say that name." Rose quickly put a hand out to stop me. "Miss Hayes, don't push him. He panics when he hears strange names." One time, I just asked him where he was from, and he collapsed from the headache. I stopped, my hands falling uselessly to my sides. I had never felt so helpless. My husband was right in front of me, just a few feet away, but the distance between us felt wider than the 3 years of his empty grave. I forced myself to swallow my tears. "I'm sorry. I won't scare him again." David watched me warily. His gaze fell on my dark clothes, then my handbag, then my mud-stained shoes. He shrank back even further. "Please leave. I don't know you." His voice was quiet, but it felt like a dull knife sawing at my heart. The man who had slept beside me, who had made me ginger tea when I had cramps, who had laughed and said he'd take on the world for me, was now telling me he didn't know me. Rose led me back into the kitchen and poured me a cup of herbal tea. "Don't blame him. Since he washed up here, he's been afraid of so many things. Fire, the smell of diesel, the sound of a metal door slamming, men shouting. One time, a neighbor was burning trash, and he hid under the cot, clutching that watch, just shaking." Leo, sitting on the doorstep, added in a small voice, "Sometimes, when he has nightmares, he says, 'Don't push me.' It scares me so much I don't even dare to call out to him." I held the warm cup, but my insides were frozen. "Have you ever asked him what he remembers?" Rose shook her head. "Asking only brings pain. I'm an old woman. I don't know anything about medicine. But I know that when a person's mind is hurt, you can't just pry the memories out. When a tree is hit by a hurricane, you have to prop it up slowly to help it live. You don't just yank it upright and break its roots." I bowed my head. A poor old woman from a fishing village understood this, while I, in my grief, had almost rushed in and demanded he recognize me. Just then, we heard a motorcycle stop outside, followed by the sound of barking dogs. Leo jumped up and peeked through a crack in the wall, then turned back, his face pale. Grandma, there are strangers here. Not from the village. Rose immediately stood up. I moved closer to the door. At the edge of their property, a man in a dark jacket was talking to a woman selling dried fish. He was holding a phone, occasionally glancing toward Rose's house. His posture wasn't that of a customer, it was that of someone scouting. From the back porch, David heard the motorcycle and grew frantic. He held his head, backing into a corner. "They're here again. They're here." I turned to him. "Who's here?" He didn't answer, sweat beading on his forehead, his lips trembling. Rose rushed to his side. "Don't ask him now. Miss Anna, I think those people might be back. A couple of men were here last week, asking about Seven." I immediately called my lawyer, Adam Cole. He picked up instantly. "Adam, I found David." There was a stunned silence on the other end. I continued, trying to keep my voice steady. "But he has amnesia. He's in a fishing village near the inlet. There are strangers here. I need to move him now, but I can't go public yet." Adam's voice was low and urgent. "Don't call anyone from the Hayes family. Don't call anyone at the company. I'm going to contact Sam Peterson. You keep David right there. We're on our way." I hung up and called Sam Peterson, a man who had been my father-in-law's loyal foreman since the early days when Apex had only 2 rusty ships. The moment he heard my voice, he asked, "Miss Anna, is it something big?" "Sam, I need a discreet vehicle and a driver I can trust to come to the fishing camp past the inlet. Don't tell a soul." "I'm on my way," he said, without another question. That's how the old guard was no time wasted on curiosity. While we waited, Leo ran to the back porch to get a pair of sandals for David. On his way back, he spotted a piece of plastic sticking out of the mud near the fence. It must have fallen from the stranger's pocket when he circled around the back. "Miss Anna, look what someone dropped." I took it from him. It was half of a parking validation card. I could just make out the faded words, "Harborfront Terminal." My heart sank. Dominic Greco's company. I wrapped the plastic fragment in a handkerchief and tucked it deep into my purse. The first thread of the conspiracy had just been pulled. When Sam's car arrived, it was already getting dark. David refused to leave. He saw the black SUV parked at the edge of the property, and his face went white. "No. I'm not going. They'll take me." I stood a few feet away from him, keeping my voice low. "You don't have to trust me. But if you stay here, those men will find you. Rose and Leo are coming with you. I won't touch you. I promise." He looked at Rose like a lost child. She patted his shoulder. "Seven, listen to Grandma. Let's get out of here for a bit. I'm coming with you." Leo also took his hand. "Mr. Seven, I'm coming too. You won't be alone." Finally, he gave a tiny nod. In the car, Rose and Leo sat on either side of David in the back. I sat in the front passenger seat, trying not to look back too often, afraid of spooking him. In the rearview mirror, I saw him clutching the burned watch, his eyes fixed on the dark world outside the window. I wanted to call his name, to tell him it was me, to ask him how much he had suffered for 3 years. But I sat in silence. The car left the fishing village under the cover of a salty darkness. After we had driven for a while, Sam glanced in the rearview mirror, his voice low. "Miss Anna, we've got a motorcycle tailing us." I looked through the side mirror. A single small headlight bobbed in the distance on the dark causeway, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away. I clutched the purse where the piece of the Harborfront parking card lay like a thorn. For 3 years, I thought I was just looking for my husband. That night, I realized someone else was still looking for him, too, to make sure he never came back. The SUV sped along the dark causeway for nearly 40 minutes, the motorcycle's headlight relentlessly following. Then, Sam made a sudden turn onto a narrow gravel path that cut through the mangrove swamp. The tires crunched on the stones. On either side, there was only the sound of insects and the raw smell of the brackish water. "Don't worry, Miss Anna," Sam said quietly. "Your father-in-law used to take this path to go fishing. Not many people know about it." I nodded, but my hand never left my purse. Inside, the parking card from Harborfront Terminal felt less like a piece of plastic and more like an unwritten confession. A house appeared at the edge of a quiet lagoon, nestled behind a grove of cypress trees. It was a simple, one-story house with faded yellow siding and a moss-covered roof. An old oak tree leaned over the water. This was a weekend retreat my father-in-law had bought years ago. After his death, David rarely mentioned it, and the rest of the Hayes family had all but forgotten it existed. That made it the safest place for now. David flinched as he got out of the car. He stared at the unfamiliar house, then at me, his eyes full of suspicion. "Where are we?" "It's just a place to rest," I said, keeping my distance. "Rose and Leo are here with you. No one is going to take you anywhere." He clutched the watch in his hand. "I don't know you." It was the second time I had heard those words, and they still hurt just as much. But I just nodded. "I know. Just think of me as someone helping Rose get you to safety." Rose gave me a look of deep sympathy. She gently guided David into the house, coaxing him. "Come on, Seven. Let's get you inside, washed up, and have some soup. Grandma's here. No one will hurt you." Leo followed behind, not forgetting to turn and tell me, "Don't be sad, Miss Anna. Sometimes Mr. Seven even forgets where I put his sandals, but he's a real good person." I managed to smile, though I felt like crying. A child's clumsy comfort can sometimes be warmer than 100 well-rehearsed words from an adult. A short while later, our lawyer, Adam Cole, arrived. He wore a light jacket, his hair damp from the misty rain. The moment he saw David huddled in a corner of the room, he froze, his lips trembling. "David." David flinched violently, covering his head. I quickly pulled Adam outside onto the porch. "Don't say his name like that. He's terrified." Adam took a deep breath, his eyes red. "I'm sorry, Anna. I can't believe it's really him." I looked back inside. David was sitting by the small fireplace. Rose had given him a bowl of chowder. He held the spoon slowly, his movements uncertain, so unlike the man I knew, it was heartbreaking. "Adam, what if I go public right now? Tell everyone he's alive?" Adam shook his head immediately. "Not yet. He's not coherent. He has no ID. He's been living under a different name for 3 years. Kevin's side could claim you hired an imposter to keep your position. Worse, they could erase any remaining evidence before we get to it. So I have to stay quiet?" "You have to be quiet at the right time." It was hard to hear, but I knew he was right. Sometimes, to save someone you love, you have to swallow your screams. If you cry out too soon, the snakes in the grass will hear you and slither away. An hour later, Dr. Lena Hansen arrived. She was a trauma psychologist Adam had called from Baltimore. She wasn't wearing a white coat, just a soft gray sweater, and her voice was very calm. She sat at a distance from David, not staring at him directly. "You can call me Lena. I'm not here to ask who you are. I'm just here to see if you're having headaches, trouble sleeping, or if you're afraid of anything." David glanced at Rose. Only when she nodded did he answer quietly, "I'm afraid of fire." Dr. Hansen didn't press him. She just made a note and said gently, "It's okay to be afraid. We don't have to stop being afraid today." I stood outside the door, listening. That one simple sentence made my heart clench. For 3 years, all I wanted was to bring my husband home. But now I realized the first thing he needed wasn't to come home, but to feel safe. After the session, Dr. Hansen spoke to me privately. "He's showing classic signs of PTSD and dissociative amnesia. The memories likely aren't gone, but they've been locked away as a self-defense mechanism. Don't force him to recognize you. Don't touch him unless he initiates it. To protect him, you first have to become his safe space." I looked at my own hands, the hands David had held so tightly on our wedding day. Now, just to touch him, I had to ask permission from his fear. That night, Sam Peterson brought supplies. Bags of groceries, medicine, clean blankets. The moment he saw David, he had to turn away to wipe his eyes. "Miss Anna, it's a miracle he's alive. His father must be watching over this family from heaven." "Sam," I said quietly, "I need you to pull the complete file on the yacht fire. Every old backup, technical log, port record, anything related to the night of June 18th. He nodded, his voice firm. "I still have some of the old hard drives your father-in-law made us keep. I'll check them." As night fell, the house by the lagoon was quiet. Rose and Leo were in the spare room. David was in the main bedroom, the door left slightly ajar. I sat on the porch, listening to the water lapping against the pilings. My phone lit up. It was a text from Kevin. "Anna, Dominic's people have booked the ballroom at the Hyatt in the Inner Harbor. 1 week from today. For the sake of Apex's image, don't forget your dress fitting tomorrow." A moment later, another text. This one from Dominic Greco. In 1 week, you won't have to carry this burden alone. I looked at the 2 messages, then looked toward the room where my husband was sleeping under the name 7. I texted Kevin back. I'll be there. But before the ceremony, I want both sides to open their books, financials, operations, insurance policies, and port data for a full due diligence review. A marriage is for a lifetime, and a merger is for the company's future. Everything must be transparent. 10 minutes later, Kevin replied, "Of course. It's good that you're being so careful. I'll arrange it." I put my phone down. On the surface, I was the defeated woman, preparing to marry my husband's rival. But in this quiet house by the water, my husband was alive. And the moment Kevin agreed to open the files, the trap they had set for me started to show its cracks. I looked out at the dark water and whispered, "David, this time, I won't let them bury you again." The next morning, I returned to Apex, my face a mask of calm composure. No one could tell I had slept less than 2 hours. No one knew that in a hidden house by a lagoon, David Hayes was still alive, startling at the sound of a door banging in the wind. I stepped into the elevator, my reflection in the polished steel walls looking back at me like a stranger. My eyes were slightly swollen, my lips pale, but my back was straight. Being a wife in a powerful family was hard enough. Being the wife of a man the world believed was dead was harder. But being a wife who had just found her husband and had to pretend to be planning a wedding to another man, life, when it decides to write a script, doesn't pull any punches. When I reached the 17th floor, the communications team was in a frenzy. On the large screen in the reception area, business news sites were already running new headlines. Apex CEO opens her heart 3 years after tragedy. Harborfront and Apex on the brink of a historic merger. I stood there, read the words, and gave a grim smile. They called it opening my heart, but what I was really doing was prying open file cabinets that had been gathering dust for 3 years. Kevin came out of a conference room, his face beaming. "Anna, you're here. Dominic's team sent over the list of documents they need to see before we partner up. I've already had our legal team start preparing." I nodded. "I want to add a few things. The complete insurance file for the Times Starlight Empress Times from 2021, the logs from the night of the fire, the departure manifests, the fuel records, the maintenance logs for the fire alarm system, and any backup security tapes from the old archives." Kevin's smile froze. "Why are you dragging up old history, sis? That case is closed." I looked at him, my voice even. "Because Harborfront wants a strategic merger, all past liabilities must be reviewed. You wouldn't want the shareholders to accuse us of hiding debts, concealing disputes, or covering up insurance issues, would you?" Kevin paused for a beat, then forced a smile. "You're right. You're always so careful. I'll have my people get on it." He turned and walked away. I watched him go, noticing how his hand clenched into a fist for a split second before relaxing. A man with nothing to hide wouldn't react like that. Around noon, Dominic Greco arrived with a team of assistants. He was carrying a large, cream-colored box, which he placed on the table in front of me. "I picked out an engagement dress for you. I hope it's to your liking." I opened the box. Inside was an ivory silk gown with a classic neckline and long sleeves adorned with tiny pearls. It was beautiful, so beautiful that any other woman might have been moved. But to me, it looked like a fishing net decorated with sequins, just waiting to be cast. I closed the lid. "Thank you, Dominic. I'll try it on later." He tilted his head slightly. "You still speak to me so formally." "In 1 week, we'll be family." 1 week is 1 week, I replied. "Today, we are still in the boardroom of Apex Maritime." Greco laughed, but his eyes didn't. "I admire your clarity, Anna. A clear-headed woman is the only kind who can hold on to a great legacy." I looked him straight in the eye. "Then I expect you to be just as clear with your paperwork." The air grew tense. Kevin quickly jumped in. All right, today is a happy occasion. Anna, you're too stressed. Dominic, please understand, she's always very thorough." David was the same way. I felt my stomach twist when he mentioned David's name. The man who had harmed him, or at the very least known he was being harmed, could speak his name with such casual familiarity. Some people have a conscience so thick that not even a torrential downpour could get it wet. That afternoon, Adam Cole came to the office in his capacity as our legal counsel for the due diligence. He wore a gray suit, carried a briefcase, and acted as if nothing out of the ordinary was happening. The moment we were alone in my office, he lowered his voice. Anna, I've reviewed the prenuptial agreement. That power of attorney clause is a landmine. After you're married, Greco would essentially have the power to overrule you in any major corporate decision. I picked up the copy. So, the moment I sign this, Apex is shackled by a wedding ring. And if you were to protest after the marriage, they would argue that you entered into the agreement willingly. I gave a dry laugh. Willingly, while being held at gunpoint. How legal. Adam placed another folder on my desk. Sam just got in touch. He remembers your father-in-law insisting on an extra set of backup security tapes from the Times Starlight Empress Times being stored in the old port archive. Not many people know it exists. I stood up immediately. To open that archive, I need a formal request from the company, right? Correct. And you need a legitimate reason. I looked at the due diligence checklist on my desk. Then we'll use the merger, with Harborfront, as the reason. I'll sign a request to open the old archive, under the guise of reviewing all potential risks before the partnership. Adam looked at me. You have to be careful. Kevin is getting suspicious. I know. But if I wait, he'll have time to lock it down. Late that afternoon, Marilyn called. I put her on speakerphone while I signed the document request. Anna, I hear you're demanding to see the files from the fire. You're about to start a new chapter in your life. Why are you digging up such painful memories? Marilyn, I said. It's precisely because I'm starting a new chapter that everything from the past needs to be clean. I don't want to get married only to have people say I brought a company full of liabilities to my new husband. She was silent for a moment. A woman shouldn't be too clever. When someone offers you a lifeline, you should be grateful. If you keep probing, people will say you don't have the good fortune to accept a blessing. I looked at the picture of David on my desk. I'll decide my own fortune, Marilyn. I hung up before she could say more. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel guilty for cutting off my mother-in-law. Around 6 p.m., Kevin brought in a thin folder. Anna, this is the list of documents the technical team could find. The Times Starlight Empress Times incident was a long time ago. A lot of things were damaged in the fire. I doubt there's anything useful left. I flipped through the pages. The list was missing several key items. I looked up. Kevin, I need the original files, not a curated list. He looked at me, his smile fading. You don't trust me, sis? I put my pen down. Business isn't about trust. It's about what's in black and white. He was silent for a few seconds, then nodded. Fine. I'll tell them to open the old archive. As he left, I immediately texted Sam Peterson. The archive will be open tonight. Be ready. His reply was 4 simple words. I'm already waiting. I sat alone in the CEO's office. Outside, the city lights were coming on. On the sofa was the box containing the engagement dress from Dominic Greco. On my desk was the prenuptial agreement. In my hand was the just-approved request to open the old archive. They had brought me a wedding gown to chain my life down, but they never expected that on the very day I pretended to accept it, the first door to a 3-year-old lie was about to be pried open. That evening, I left the CEO's office when the Apex building was nearly dark. My footsteps echoed in the empty corridor. In my hand was the authorization form to open the old archive, bearing my signature and the stamp of the legal department. It was a thin piece of paper, but to get it, I had to pretend to surrender to a marriage trap. Sam Peterson was waiting for me in the parking garage. He was wearing a faded jacket that smelled faintly of diesel oil, the signature scent of a portman. Miss Anna, I've already spoken to Frank, the night guard at the old archive. He was one of your father-in-law's men. We can trust him. Let's go now, Sam, I said. The night is long, but I'm sure the people who want to erase the past aren't sleeping. The old archive was located in the technical area near Berth 3, where empty containers were stacked like giant dark Lego blocks. The night wind whistled through the mooring lines. The room was no bigger than a kitchen, with yellowed walls, a row of metal file cabinets on one side, and several dusty tape decks on the other. Frank, the guard, pulled the metal door halfway down as soon as we entered. Miss Anna, Sam, I can only give you 2 hours. The day shift won't know anyone was in here until morning. Sam clapped him on the shoulder. 2 hours is enough. Just make sure no one comes snooping. Adam Cole was there too. He brought a bag for evidence and a small camcorder to document our findings. He didn't say much, only instructing, "Everything we take out needs to be filmed. If this goes to the authorities, they need to know exactly where these documents and tapes came from." I stood behind Sam as Frank unlocked the old cabinets. The sound of the key turning in the rusty lock was dry and grating. After a moment, he pulled out several boxes of backup tapes, logbooks, the fire alarm records, a departure manifest, and a thick file stamped Times Starlight Empress, 2021. Just seeing those 3 words made my eyes sting. Frank loaded a backup tape into a machine. The old monitor flickered to life, showing a grainy image of a lower deck corridor on the yacht. The night of June 18th came back to me in blurry, silent frames. At 8:31 p.m., a crew member walked by. At 8:48 p.m., David appeared at the end of the hall, holding a glass, his steps unsteady. I held my breath. "Stop, right there." Frank paused the tape. The image was low resolution, but I recognized his posture, his shoulders slightly slumped, his left hand pressed against his stomach, just as he always did when his ulcer flared up. A man in a waiter's uniform followed closely behind him, his head bowed low. Adam noted the time. At 9:02 p.m., the screen suddenly went black. Sam had Frank check the tapes from other angles, another corridor, the engine room entrance, the secondary gangway. All of them went dark at the same time. Frank's voice trembled. "This wasn't the fire, Miss Anna. The fire didn't start for almost an hour after this. A simultaneous outage like this, someone cut the feed deliberately." Adam asked, "For how long?" Sam cross-referenced a logbook, his voice heavy. 47 minutes. A chill snaked down my spine. 47 minutes isn't long in a lifetime, but it's long enough to drug a man, disable a fire alarm, move a body off a yacht, and turn my husband into a ghost in the eyes of the world. Frank pulled out the yacht's fire alarm log. The old printout clearly showed that the alarm for the aft section had been manually disabled at 8:59 p.m., minutes before the feed was cut. "Who had the authority to do that?" I asked. Frank flipped through a code access log, his face turning pale. This override code could only be used by the chief engineer or someone with special authorization. This entry shows the code was used by Daniel Carter. He was a technical assistant, very close to Kevin. He quit right after the fire. I heard he moved down south. Adam immediately took photos of the documents. I dug my nails into the edge of the table, the pain a distant throb. Sam opened the departure manifest. At 9:26 p.m., a small service boat departed from the yacht's mooring area. But in the official report filed after the incident, there was no mention of any such departure. The footage from a distant camera was extremely grainy, but it showed 2 figures on the boat and a long, tarpaulin-covered object between them. I stared at that object, my chest filling with ice water. What was it? No one had to say it. We all knew that under that tarp, it could have been David. Adam placed all the documents, tape copies, and logbooks into evidence bags. His voice was firm. "This is no longer a wife's intuition. This is evidence of a crime." I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Some truths are so stark they leave you empty, beyond tears. Near midnight, I brought copies of the tapes and documents back to the house by the lagoon. Dr. Hansen was already there. I hadn't planned on showing them to David, but she suggested it. If you show him brief, non-violent clips, it might trigger something, but you have to stop immediately if he shows any sign of distress. David was sitting on a wooden chair on the screened-in porch. When he heard me arrive, he looked up, then quickly looked back down at the burned watch in his hands. He still didn't call me Anna, but he no longer flinched at my presence. I placed a laptop on a table a few feet away from him. "Can you watch something for a minute? If you feel a headache, I'll turn it off right away." He looked at Rose, who nodded. He then slowly turned his gaze to the screen. The clip played, showing him walking down the corridor. David frowned, his hand tightening on the arm of the chair. When the image of the service boat with the tarp-covered object appeared, his lips began to tremble. "Diesel," he whispered. Dr. Hansen spoke gently. "What smell are you remembering?" His breathing grew ragged. "Diesel fuel, so dark." I stood behind the doctor, not daring to move. David clutched his head, his voice cracking. Don't pull me, Kevin." My heart felt like it had been stabbed. Dr. Hansen immediately shut the laptop and moved closer, but didn't touch him. We're stopping here. You are safe. You are in the house with Rose and Leo. There is no fire. David bent over, sweat dripping onto the floor. Rose sat beside him, simply placing a cool cloth in his hand. Breathe, Seven. Just breathe, son. Slow. I turned away, the tears finally coming. Not from weakness, but because the name that had just escaped my husband's lips was no longer just my suspicion. That night, after David had fallen into an exhausted sleep, I stood on the porch, staring at the dark water. On my phone, a text from Kevin lit up the screen. Anna, don't forget the dress fitting tomorrow. Dominic is very much looking forward to the ceremony. I read it and turned off the phone. Tomorrow, I would still go to the fitting. I would still smile. I would still let them think their net had closed around me. But those 47 missing minutes were back. And this time, they were going to drag every person who buried my husband alive out into the light. On the 5th day, I didn't go to the office. I told everyone I was going for my dress fitting and meeting with the event planners for the engagement party. Kevin even sent a saccharine text. Take a rest, sis. I'll handle things at the company. I read it and felt a chill. Sometimes the easiest way to remove someone from power isn't to kick them out, but to gently offer them a chair and tell them to rest. Adam Cole picked me up in a silver minivan, not my usual company car. He handed me a baseball cap and a face mask. Anna, we're meeting 2 people today. First is a man named George Clark, a retired mechanic who was in charge of the secondary systems on the Times Starlight Empress. The second is a woman named Maria Flores, a waitress who was working the party that night. Are they still in Baltimore? I asked. George is, but he quit his job. Lives in a rundown apartment complex near the bridge. Maria went back to her hometown and opened a small diner. Both of them received a significant amount of money after the fire. I looked out the car window. The morning traffic was dense, but inside my heart was a cold, empty space. Money from who? Adam's reply was quiet. Through Daniel Carter, Kevin's man. George Clark's apartment was in a small, damp alley. The building's brick facade was covered in mildew. He was in his 60s, with graying hair and a stooped back. The moment Adam showed him his business card, he started waving his hands dismissively. I don't know anything. The police already asked their questions. It was an accident. Leave me alone. I took off my mask. Mr. Clark, I'm David Hayes' wife. He froze, his cloudy eyes meeting mine for a second before darting away. I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am, but there's no point in digging up the past. I took out my phone and showed him a picture of David, taken just a day ago at the house by the lagoon. It was a side profile. He was thinner, his hair longer, but the scar on his shoulder and the burned watch on his wrist were clearly visible. George stared at the photo, and his hands began to shake so violently that the ceramic mug on his table fell and shattered on the floor. Mr. Hayes? He's alive? I looked him straight in the eye. He's alive, but with no memory. He's terrified of fire and the sound of men's voices. Have you been able to sleep peacefully for the past 3 years, Mr. Clark? He collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands. This old man, who had spent his life around engine grease and machinery, began to sob like a child. I thought they were just smuggling something. I swear to God, I didn't know they were going to hurt anyone. Adam placed a digital recorder on the table, his voice calm. Tell us everything you know. From the beginning. George explained that on the day before June 18th, Daniel Carter had approached him. He offered him $52,000 to misalign a few corridor cameras and temporarily disable the aft fire alarm for a short period. Carter told him it was to move a sensitive shipment without anyone noticing. George was drowning in debt. His wife needed dialysis. His son had defaulted on a loan. The money was too much, the promise too sweet, and his conscience was being strangled by poverty. I did what he asked and left the yacht before 9 p.m. When I heard about the fire the next morning, I was terrified. Carter warned me that if I said a word, my family wouldn't be safe. He gave me more money and told me to testify that the equipment had malfunctioned due to the heat. Do you still have anything? I asked. He stood up, trembling, and pried a loose floorboard from under his bed. From the hollow space, he pulled out an old cell phone wrapped in a plastic bag. I never dared to use it, but I never dared to throw it away either. There are still some texts from Carter on here. I kept it as insurance. I knew I did wrong, but I was also afraid that one day they'd come to silence me for good. Adam took the phone with a gloved hand and placed it in an evidence bag. Leaving George's apartment, I was silent. Some truths don't bring relief. They just give the wound a clearer shape. That afternoon, we found the small diner in a quiet suburb. Maria Flores recognized me instantly. She was standing behind a large pot of soup, a ladle in her hand, but her face went white. "I'm not talking to anyone. Please, just go." I walked closer, my voice low. "Maria, my husband is alive." The ladle slipped from her hand and clattered into the pot, splashing hot broth onto her arm, but she didn't even flinch. Adam showed her the picture of David. She stared at it, then burst into tears, pulling us into the back room. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry to Mr. Hayes, and to you." I sat down across from her. "Just tell me what you saw that night." Maria wiped her eyes on her apron. "That night, I was serving drinks at the party. One of the technical crew gave me a glass of water and told me to take it down to Mr. Hayes, said he was having stomach pain. I didn't think anything of it. I just did what I was asked." Her voice caught in her throat, her hands twisting in her lap. A little while after he drank it, his face went pale. He was leaning against the wall, stumbling. I saw two men helping him down to the lower deck. One was wearing a waiter's uniform. The other one was standing in the shadows. "Did you see Kevin Hayes?" I asked. Maria bit her lip. I didn't see his face clearly, but I heard his voice. He was on the phone saying, "Get him downstairs first. Don't let anyone see." I'll never forget that voice. My chest tightened. What happened after? After the fire, their people found me. They gave me $26,000 and told me to go back home and open a diner. They told me not to mention what I saw. They knew my younger brother worked on a deep-sea fishing boat. They threatened that if I said anything, he might have an accident at sea. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. I was a coward. I took the money. I told myself he was already gone, and nothing I said could bring him back. But for 3 years, I've dreamt of that corridor every night. I see Mr. Hayes leaning against the wall, his face so pale, and I just stood there and watched. I closed my eyes. $26,000 to buy silence. $52,000 to tamper with cameras. And 3 years of a man's life, discarded like a nameless piece of cargo. Adam took her official statement right there. He told her the same thing he had told George Clark over the phone. "From now on, you are not to go home alone. Our law firm will arrange a safe place for you to stay and file a request for witness protection. If you want to atone for your mistake, you have to stay alive to tell the truth." Maria nodded, tears streaming down her face. As we were getting into the car, I noticed a black sedan parked across the street. The tinted window rolled down for a split second, then back up. Adam saw it too. He didn't say anything, just opened the door for me. A few minutes down the road, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Kevin. "Anna, where did you go for your dress fitting today? Dominic said the bridal shop never saw you." I felt a chill run through me. He was on to me. I texted back, "I met with a private seamstress for alterations. I'll be at the hotel tomorrow to see the ballroom." 3 minutes later, a text from an unknown number appeared. "The dead should stay dead. The living shouldn't dig up graves." I stared at the screen for a long time, then showed it to Adam. He said only one thing. "They're scared." I looked out at the road ahead. For the first time in 3 years, the fear was no longer just mine. It was starting to crawl back to the people who thought they had buried it all in ashes. On the 6th day, I woke up while the lagoon was still veiled in a thin layer of morning mist. The old house was unusually quiet. The distant crowing of a rooster, the gentle lapping of water against the pilings, the sound of Rose starting the fire in the kitchen, everything was hushed, as if everyone was afraid that a single loud noise would startle David. Since he'd been brought here, his sleep had been restless. Every night he would jolt awake, his forehead slick with sweat, his hand clutching the burned watch. Sometimes he'd just stare into the darkness, breathing heavily, as if he were still trapped in the lower deck of the yacht. Rose would have to sit by his side, murmuring, "It's okay, Seven. There's no fire, Grandma's here. Leo's here." Every time I heard that, I could only stand outside the door, biting my lip until I tasted blood. My husband was right there, but I couldn't hold him, couldn't shake him awake, couldn't say I'm here to soothe the 3 years of longing. Dr. Hansen had been very clear. A person who has lived in fear for so long is like a bird with a broken wing. To help it fly again, you have to let it learn to trust your hand first. That morning, Dr. Hansen arrived early. She wore a simple gray sweater, her hair tied back neatly. In her hands was a small cloth bag. Inside was a piece of old sailing rope, a scrap of gray canvas, a small speaker that played the soft sound of waves, and David's watch. She placed each item on the wooden table, not pushing them toward him. "Today, we're not going to try to remember everything," she said slowly. "We're just going to look at a few things, listen to a few sounds. If you feel uncomfortable at any point, we'll stop immediately." David sat in a chair by the window. Rose was mending a net nearby. Leo sat on the doorstep, his arms wrapped around his knees, his eyes fixed on Mr. Seven. I stood by the door, far enough away that he wouldn't feel cornered. He looked at the items on the table, his gaze lingering on the watch. After a long moment, he reached out and touched the cracked crystal face. My throat tightened. I had bought him that watch for his 36th birthday. He had put it on and held it up to me, smiling like a boy. A gift from my wife. I'll wear it until it breaks, and it had broken. It broke on a night of fire, along with the peace of our lives. Dr. Hansen turned on the speaker. The soft, rhythmic sound of waves filled the room. David frowned, his hand tightening around the watch. "What are you seeing?" the doctor asked. He shook his head. "Darkness." "Is there a smell in the darkness?" His lips trembled. "Diesel fuel, smoke, a bitter taste from the water." I gripped the doorframe, my whole body tense, not daring to make a sound. Dr. Hansen gently placed the piece of rope a little closer. "Do you remember where you were?" David's breathing grew heavy. A corridor. "Below deck. I couldn't walk straight." Someone said, "Mr. Hayes, you should rest." He grimaced, one hand going to his stomach. My stomach hurt. My head was spinning. My legs wouldn't listen. Rose stopped her work. Leo held his breath. Dr. Hansen didn't push. She simply moved the piece of gray canvas slightly, so he would see it. The moment David's eyes landed on the canvas, his face went white. A cloth, over my face, his voice was a raw rasp. I couldn't see anything. Someone was pulling my legs. The floor was so cold. My shoulder, it hurt. I heard a metal door slam shut. Hearing this, I felt my own heart being crushed. My mind reeled with the image of my husband being dragged down a cold corridor, a cloth thrown over him like he was cargo, pushed out of his own life while he was still breathing. David suddenly gritted his teeth. "Kevin." The name dropped into the quiet room like a stone into still water. Rose looked up sharply. Leo's eyes went wide. I stood frozen, my nails digging into my palms. Dr. Hansen asked very gently, "What did you hear the person named Kevin say?" David started to tremble, sweat beading on his temples. He said, "I'm sorry, brother." He swallowed hard, as if the words were scraping his throat. "If you want to blame someone, blame yourself for being in the way." I closed my eyes. Kevin, the younger brother who had bowed his head before his father's portrait, the one who had called me sis, the one who claimed he only wanted to protect Apex for David. It turned out, in my husband's shattered memory, he wasn't an outsider to the tragedy. He was at its very center. Dr. Hansen was about to stop, but David kept muttering. "There was someone else." "Who was it?" she asked. He shook his head, his eyes reddening. Couldn't see his face. A different voice. He said, "Do it quickly, before the wind changes direction." A chill shot through me. Before the wind changes direction, I had heard Dominic Greco say that exact phrase during a negotiation once. He said it slowly, confidently, like a man who was used to using the wind to chart his course. Now, that same phrase was emerging from David's memory, drawing a direct line from the burning yacht to harborfront shipping. David's breathing became rapid and shallow. Dr. Hansen immediately turned off the speaker and moved the cloth and rope away. "We're stopping here. You are in the house by the lagoon. There is no fire. No one is pulling you. Do you hear my voice?" David doubled over, his hands clutching his head. Rose put down her net, her voice trembling. Breathe. 7. Just breathe. The way I taught you. In and out. No one is hurting you. I took one step forward, then stopped. I was shaking uncontrollably. I wanted to rush to him, to hold him, to tell him that I believed him, that I heard everything, that I would make them pay. But I had to stay still. Standing still was the hardest way I had ever had to love him. After a few minutes, David looked up. His eyes scanned the room and then landed on me. I didn't dare say his name too loudly. I just whispered, "David." He looked at me for a long time. His eyes were still clouded with pain and confusion, but they were no longer the eyes of a stranger. Then, he said my name, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. Anna. Just that one word. I felt my legs give way. For 3 years, so many people had called my name. Marilyn to blame me, Kevin to placate me, shareholders to question me, reporters to dissect me. But not one of them had made me feel both shattered and reborn like that single word from his lips. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. Yes, I'm here. David pushed himself up from the chair and slowly walked toward me. Dr. Hansen didn't stop him, just watched. When he was an arm's length away, he paused, as if still afraid his own memory was wrong. I remember you crying. I laughed through my tears. I cried a lot. I cried so much I thought I'd run out of tears. His hand lifted, and I held my breath, not daring to reach for it first. After a moment, he placed his hand on my shoulder. The touch was so light, as if he were afraid I might disappear. But for me, it had the weight of 3 years of waiting. Leo, sitting on the doorstep, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Rose turned away, muttering, "This sea air is making my eyes water." No one said anything else. Some moments are too sacred for words. After David had calmed down, Dr. Hansen was very clear. What David remembered today is crucial. But we can only use what he is certain of. No additions, no interpretations. A person with a wounded memory is like a person with a wounded body. If you probe too deeply, you'll just make it bleed again. Adam Cole listened to the recording and nodded. Anna, the engagement party is tomorrow. The shareholders, the banks, the press, Kevin, Marilyn, and Dominic Greco will all be there. If we make our move then, it will be harder for them to deny. David turned to me. There was a glimmer of clarity in his eyes, mixed with pain and an apology he couldn't yet voice. You still have to stand next to him? I looked at him. Just one more time. But I won't be standing there as his bride. I'll be standing there to pull you out of the grave they built for you. He was silent for a long time. Then he nodded. That evening, I checked into the hotel in the Inner Harbor to prepare for the next day. I didn't wear the ivory gown Dominic Greco had sent. Instead, I chose a deep teal-colored dress. The color wasn't bright, but it was deep and cool, giving me the strength to walk onto that stage with my back straight. In the dressing room, I stood before the mirror. On the chair behind me was the old, faded jacket David had worn in the fishing village. It still smelled faintly of sun, salt, and the days he had survived without knowing who he was. On one side was the dress I would wear to a fake ceremony. On the other was the coat of the husband who had clawed his way back from the dead. I looked at the two reflections, wiped a tear, and told myself, tomorrow, I am no one's bride. Tomorrow, I am bringing my husband home on the very stage they built to steal him from me one last time. On Sunday, the 18th of May 2024, the ballroom of the hotel overlooking the harbor was decorated entirely in white flowers. A large electronic screen at the entrance flashed the words, Engagement Celebration and Strategic Partnership Announcement, Apex Maritime and Harborfront Shipping. The gold lettering glowed against a dark red background. Spotlights illuminated towering vases of white orchids. The entire scene was opulent and cold, like a wedding with no love, only a contract draped in lace. I sat in the waiting room, listening to the sounds from outside, the murmur of guests, the clinking of glasses, the clicking of cameras. The major shareholders of Apex were nearly all there. Representatives from the banks occupied the front row. A crowd of business reporters filled a corner of the hall. Everyone was waiting for the big news story, the handshake between two shipping giants. Kevin walked in. He looked me up and down, a slight frown creasing his brow when he saw my teal dress instead of the ivory gown. Anna, why aren't you wearing the dress Dominic picked out? I adjusted the cuff of my sleeve. I'm wearing what I feel is appropriate. He forced a smile. Today is a happy occasion. Don't make things awkward. Dominic went to a lot of trouble to plan this. I met his eyes in the mirror. A little awkwardness is better than living a lifetime of lies, wouldn't you say, Kevin? His smile faltered. He looked like he wanted to ask more, but just then, Marilyn swept into the room. She was wearing a purple velvet gown, a pearl necklace at her throat, her makeup perfectly applied. The moment she saw me, she beamed for the photographer. "My daughter, you look beautiful. I'm so glad you finally decided to think about your future." I turned to face her. For 3 years, I had called her Marilyn, but thought of her as a mother figure. I had believed that even as David's stepmother, she loved him in her own way. But looking at her smile now, I just felt a profound weariness. Yes, today, I am thinking very carefully about the future. She didn't catch my meaning. She stepped forward and took my hand, squeezing it in a subtle warning. "When you go out there, be gracious. Don't embarrass the Hayes family. The shareholders, the bankers, the press, they are all watching you." I pulled my hand away. The Hayes family was embarrassed the moment someone decided to use a son's life as a business asset, Marilyn. Her face paled slightly. "What are you trying to say?" Before I could answer, the MC's voice boomed from the ballroom, calling everyone to the stage. Marilyn gave me one last look, her eyes no longer soft, then turned and walked out. Dominic Greco was standing in the center of the hall, wearing a black tuxedo with a wine-colored tie, the picture of a man who had already won. On the signing table sat the partnership agreement, a velvet ring box, and a bouquet of white flowers. He walked toward me, extending his hand. "Anna, today you can finally stop fighting." I looked at his hand, then walked straight past him onto the stage. Kevin immediately took the microphone, smiling at the guests. "Ladies and gentlemen, friends, after so much tragedy, my sister-in-law has finally chosen the best path forward for Apex. If my brother David is watching from above, I'm sure he is at peace." A ripple of applause went through the hall. I heard the words "watching from above" and my throat went tight with rage. A living man, spoken of as a spirit, at a ceremony designed to steal his legacy. The MC invited me to speak. I took the microphone. The room gradually fell silent. I looked out at the faces. Marilyn in the front row clutching a silk handkerchief. Kevin standing beside Dominic Greco, his eyes shining with anticipation. And Dominic Greco still smiling, waiting for me to read the pre-written thank you speech. I spoke slowly, each word deliberate. "Thank you all for coming. But first, I need to make something clear. There will be no engagement ceremony today." The hall erupted in gasps and murmurs. Kevin rushed toward me. "Anna, what are you talking about? You're just tired. You're confused." I didn't look at him. "I'm not confused. And I'm not so tired that I don't know where I'm standing." Dominic Greco took a step forward, his voice still attempting to sound gentle. "Anna, there are a lot of people here. Whatever is bothering you, we can discuss it privately. Don't let your emotions ruin this." I turned to him. "Mr. Greco, the act of burying a living man is not something that should be discussed privately." That sentence silenced the entire hall. I continued, "If my husband, David Hayes, was truly dead, then why has someone been systematically weakening Apex for the past 3 years? Why was our $108 million line of credit frozen at the most critical moment? Why was a $39.2 million contract steered directly to Harborfront Shipping? And why, in your prenuptial agreement, is there a clause requiring me to sign over my voting shares to you for 5 years? The whispers grew louder. I clicked a remote. The large screen behind me lit up. First, the grainy security footage from the Times Starlight Empress. David appeared, stumbling down the corridor. Then, at 9:02 p.m., the screen went black. "This is the backup tape from the port archive," I said. Nearly an hour before the fire started, the cameras in multiple locations went dead for 47 minutes. This was not caused by the fire. I clicked again. The fire alarm log appeared. "This is the system log. The alarm in the aft section was manually disabled at 8:59 p.m. The access code used to disable it belonged to Daniel Carter, a technical assistant and a close associate of Kevin Hayes." Kevin shouted, "That's fake! All of it is fabricated." I looked at him. "If it's fabricated, Kevin, Then you can calmly wait for the authorities to investigate. Why are you shouting? His face turned beet red. I clicked again. The departure manifest and the grainy long-shot footage appeared. This is the log showing a service boat leaving the yacht at 9:26 p.m., a departure that was never mentioned in the official report. On board were 2 men and a long tarp-covered object. That object, I believe, was my husband. The room was in an uproar. People were standing up. Reporters were hoisting their cameras. The bank representatives were looking at each other, their faces grim. I didn't stop. These are the financial records showing a $7.36 million payment funneled through a shell corporation linked to Dominic Greco's associates. This is the sham partnership agreement disguised as a prenuptial contract. This is the sworn testimony of George Clark, the man who was paid $52,000 to tamper with the cameras and the fire alarm. And this is the sworn testimony of Maria Flores, the waitress who saw my husband drink a drugged glass of water before being dragged below deck. Marilyn clutched her chest, slumping in her chair. Oh my God, what is wrong with her? Someone get her off the stage, she's having a breakdown. I looked at her, my voice as cold as my heart felt. Don't start crying yet, Marilyn. There's a lot more you need to hear today. Dominic Greco turned to the technical crew. Shut that screen off. But Adam Cole was already standing by the control panel, flanked by 2 hotel security guards. He held up a sealed evidence binder and spoke clearly into a microphone. All original tapes, logs, documents, and witness testimonies have been copied, their chain of custody documented, and a full set has been delivered to the proper authorities. No one is to tamper with this evidence. Kevin lunged toward the stage, pointing at me. You did this because you didn't want to get married. You're framing me. I'm his brother. I'm a Hayes. Then answer me this, Kevin, I replied. If you're his brother, why does he scream in terror at the sound of your name? Why, in his moments of panic, is your name the first one he calls out? Kevin froze. At that moment, a side door to the ballroom opened. David walked in. He was wearing a simple white shirt and a gray jacket. Dr. Hansen was by his side. Adam signaled for the crowd to keep their distance. David was thinner, his face still pale, but it was him, the man the entire room thought was dead. A glass shattered on the floor. Someone whispered, "My God, it's David Hayes." Marilyn shot to her feet, her lips trembling. David? Kevin stumbled backward, the blood draining from his face. Dominic Greco's smile was gone, his hand clenching the ring box so tightly his knuckles were white. David looked around the room, his gaze finally settling on Kevin. He stood there for a long moment, as if gathering all the strength from his fragmented memories. Finally, he spoke, his voice hoarse but clear. You weren't trying to save Apex, Kevin. You were trying to bury me a second time. The entire hall fell silent. David stood there, gaunt and weary, but the steel was back in his eyes. He didn't rush. Doctor, Hansen quietly reminded him, just say what you're sure you remember. You don't have to force it. David nodded, his eyes locked on his brother. That night, I drank the water your man gave me. I got dizzy. My stomach was on fire. I couldn't stand. I remember the smell of diesel. I remember a cloth over my face. I remember being dragged down a cold hall. And I remember your voice in my ear. He paused, his breath catching, as if each word was tearing open a fresh wound. I'm sorry, brother. If you want to blame someone, blame yourself for being in the way. Kevin shook his head frantically. No, that's not what happened. Your memory is gone. You're confused. Someone fed you those lines. Adam Cole stepped forward and placed the sealed evidence folders on the table. He spoke into the microphone, his voice ringing with authority. Mr. Hayes's memory does not stand alone. Here's the security tape, missing 47 minutes. Here's the fire alarm log, showing the system was manually disabled. Here's the manifest for the unrecorded service boat. Adam added another file to the stack. Here are the sworn testimonies from Mr. Clark and Miss Flores. And here are the financial records detailing a $7.36 million payment funneled through a shell corporation linked to Mr. Dominic Greco. The room exploded with noise. 2 plainclothes police officers entered from a side door. One held up a badge. Mr. Kevin Hayes, Mrs. Marilyn Hayes, and Mr. Dominic Greco, we need you to come with us to answer some questions. We ask for everyone's cooperation. Dominic's face was ashen. but he tried to maintain his composure. "You can't just act on unverified documents and tarnish my company's reputation." Adam replied immediately, "We are not the judge, but the chain of custody for all evidence is intact. The authorities will determine the truth." Kevin suddenly let out a broken, manic laugh. "Sister-in-law, all I wanted was to help. Help! All of you. You're on her side." My father. He only ever saw David as his son. "What about me? I'm a Hayes too. But I had to stand by and watch him get everything." I looked at him. "So you destroyed your own brother because you felt slighted?" Kevin turned on me, his eyes wild. "What do you know? You're just a wife. You think you're so noble? A woman who marries into the family for a few years and gets to sit in the CEO's chair, while I, who was born a Hayes, have to call you sis?" Marilyn screamed, "Kevin, be quiet!" But it was too late. Once greed breaks its dam, no silk handkerchief can hold back the flood. I pulled an old yellowed envelope from my folder. "This is a handwritten letter from your father, Robert Hayes, sent to his lawyer before he passed. In it, he states that he discovered Kevin was selling shipping route information to a competitor. That is why he removed him from any position of authority at Apex." Marilyn collapsed into her chair, her face devoid of all color. I looked at her, and for the first time, I spoke her name without any pretense. "Marilyn, you knew about this. You knew Robert didn't disinherit your son without reason. But for 3 years, you used your tears, the family name, and this false narrative of injustice to pressure me into handing the company over to Kevin. You may not have lit the match that night, but you helped cover up the arson." Marilyn sobbed. "I was just afraid of losing another son. So you chose to let my husband be lost a second time," I said softly. Her crying stopped. "Dominic Greco was escorted out to answer for his role in orchestrating the financial crisis, manipulating contracts, and using the marriage proposal as a means to seize control of the company." Kevin was taken into custody. As they led him past me, he still glared with pure hatred, but he was silent. Marilyn was helped from the room. Before she left, she turned to David, her lips moving. "David, David looked at her for a long time, then said simply, "You stopped being my mother the day you chose to stay silent." Marilyn broke down completely, but this time, no one rushed to comfort her. The aftermath was a whirlwind. The engagement party became a national business scandal. The headlines were no longer about a grieving CEO finding new love, but about the dark truth behind the Times Starlight Empress Times fire. The investigation deepened, and one by one, those who had been paid for their silence came forward. Daniel Carter was apprehended after weeks on the run. Apex Maritime didn't collapse. The banks, seeing the truth, reopened negotiations. Old partners called to apologize, admitting they had been misled by rumors. I kept my response brief. Long-term partnerships are built on trust. Next time, I hope you'll look at the facts before you listen to whispers. I remained as acting CEO while David began intensive therapy with Dr. Hansen. His memory didn't return all at once. Some days were clear. On others, he would sit quietly by the window, staring at the water as if searching for the parts of his life that had been washed away. But every day, he said my name a little more naturally. "Anna, did you eat breakfast? Anna, can I go for a walk today? Anna, I'm craving that crab soup you make." Simple sentences, but each one warmed my soul. They say marriage is a lifelong bond. Sometimes, that bond isn't forged in grand vows or lavish ceremonies, but in one person refusing to stop waiting and another fighting to come home. Rose and Leo were brought to the Apex headquarters. I didn't call it charity. I stood before the entire staff and said, "These are the benefactors of my family and of this company. Without Rose and her grandson, Leo, our true CEO would never have returned." Leo looked at the floor, his ears bright red. Rose just gave a gummy smile. "I didn't do anything special, Miss Anna. When someone washes up at your door and they're still breathing, you help them. That's just what we do." I listened, my throat tight. Some people are poor in wealth but so rich in spirit that all the money in the world couldn't buy it. A month later, I took David back to the coastal cemetery. The sky was clear, the wind was gentle, and the sun cast a soft light on the pine trees. I brought a cloth with me, but this time I didn't clean the photograph. David himself stood before his own empty grave, staring at the granite bearing his name. "For 3 years," he said quietly. "You stood here alone?" I nodded. "I'd come and talk to you. Tell you about the company, about the days I was so tired I wanted to give up." He turned to me, his eyes red. "I'm sorry. I let you carry it all for too long." I carefully removed his photograph from the headstone and held it to my chest. This picture, which had seen me through so many rainy days and tearful conversations, no longer felt cold. "You're home now," I said. "That's all that matters." David reached out and took my hand. This time, it didn't tremble. The sea breeze whispered through the pines. The cenotaph was still there, but it was no longer a monument to a lie. It was just a reminder that even when someone is lost in the deepest darkness, if one person refuses to give up, the light will always find its way home. In this life, money can blind people, but it is love and loyalty that keep a family from falling apart. The good may suffer at first, but in the end, an honest heart will not be forsaken.